everyone, welcome back. We're going to do a deep dive today into how authoritarians gain and maintain power.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it is. And thankfully, we have a great guide for this deep dive. It's an essay by Andrei Babitsky. He's a Russian journalist who had a front row seat to the rise of Putin's Russia.
Wow, yeah, I've heard him. He's been pretty outspoken.
Yeah, he has. And his piece, A Russian Warning About Trump, which was published on Coda Story, really got us thinking.
Okay, so what's his take?
Well, the thing is, he's not focused on the usual Trump-Putin collusion theories. You know, like all that stuff that was in the news a few years ago.
Right, I remember all that.
Yeah, so Babitsky, he sees something much deeper. He argues that both men, despite their different backgrounds, share a similar worldview.
Interesting. Similar playbook for how they approach power.
Exactly, and that's what makes this essay so insightful and honestly a little unsettling.
For sure. I can see how that would be concerning.
Okay, so let's unpack this. So
Yeah.
Babitsky draws some pretty compelling parallels between Trump and Putin.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So for example, they both came of age after World War II.
Right, a time when the world was figuring out a new order. Like, the old rules didn't seem to apply as much anymore.
Exactly. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That kind of shift in the global landscape.
Mm.
It created a breeding ground for leaders who weren't afraid to operate outside of traditional norms.
Yeah, like a willingness to break the rules or bend them to their will.
Right. And both Trump and Putin, they seem to believe that respect comes from projecting strength and even a little bit of fear.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Remember when Trump told Bob Woodward that real power is fear?
Oh, yeah. Hard to forget a quote like that.
It's a mindset that seems pretty consistent with Putin's actions on the world stage, too.
Oh, absolutely.
And another striking similarity is their emphasis on loyalty above all else.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Babitsky uses J.D. Vance as an example, you know, the author of Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, yeah, I read that book. It was really interesting.
Yeah, well, Vance initially criticized Trump pretty harshly.
Interesting.
But then he became a staunch supporter, seemingly abandoning his previous principles.
Wow. So it's almost as if the need to be seen as loyal, to fit into that inner circle, it trumps personal convictions.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what happens to people who dare to dissent or question the leader's decisions.
Yeah, not a good place to be, I imagine.
That's a point that Babitsky drives home. He argues that this focus on unwavering loyalty, it creates a system that rewards blind obedience and punishes critical thinking.
Yeah, it's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Right. So it's not just about the leader themselves, it's about the entire ecosystem that enables their rise and sustains their power.
Yeah, the enablers are just as important as the leader in some ways.
Absolutely. And that system extends to institutions as well. Both Trump and Putin view democratic institutions with suspicion.
They see any challenge to their authority as a personal attack.
Exactly. Like,
Well-
think about Trump's claims of a stolen election.
Oh, right. He couldn't accept losing.
Yeah.
He just couldn't accept the legitimacy of a democratic process that didn't favor him.
Exactly. And for Putin, this distrust goes back even further. Remember his attempts to influence the Ukrainian elections back in 2005?
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that.
Well, when those attempts failed, it seemed to reinforce his belief that democratic processes just can't be trusted.
So what do you do when you believe the system is rigged against you? You rig it yourself.
Exactly. You bend it to your will.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really dangerous.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So we've got these two leaders with similar playbooks and a deep distrust of democratic institutions. What happens next?
That's a great question, and one that we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Welcome back. So we've been talking about some pretty unsettling stuff. You know, these parallels between Putin and Trump.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is. But what's clear is that it's not just about their individual actions. It's about these broader patterns, you know, how they approach power.
Right, exactly. It's those patterns that we need to learn to recognize no matter who the leader is.
So where do we go from here? Babitsky actually offers some advice on how to approach this whole thing.
Okay, I'm listening.
He argues that one of the biggest mistakes we make is focusing too much on the leader's official powers.
You mean like the stuff that's laid out in constitutions and laws?
Exactly. That's what he's saying. He's saying that authoritarians don't play by the rules.
Of course not. They find loopholes. They exploit vulnerabilities. They manipulate systems from within.
So it's not about brute force. It's about being clever, insidious, taking advantage of weaknesses.
Right. It's not a frontal assault. It's more like a slow, creeping takeover.
Like termites infesting a house.
Exactly. They don't knock down the walls. They eat away at the structure from the inside, slowly weakening it until it collapses.
And Babitsky argues that some of the people most vulnerable to this kind of manipulation are the ones least equipped to resist it.
Who's he talking about?
Civil servants, military officers, people who are used to working within hierarchies and following orders.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. What makes them such easy targets?
Well, for one thing, they're not trained to be on guard against these kinds of authoritarian tactics. Their jobs often depend on maintaining order or following directives.
Not questioning authority or rocking the boat.
Exactly. And if their leader, someone with immense power over their career, starts demanding loyalty above all else,
It puts them in a really tough spot.
absolutely, it becomes a test of loyalty with extremely high stakes. Imagine being a civil servant.
Hmm.
You've dedicated your life to public service, and suddenly you're being pressured to choose between your principles and your livelihood.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. And then you add in the element of fear that authoritarians are so good at cultivating.
Right. People become afraid to speak out, afraid to challenge those in power, even if they see something wrong.
Fear is an incredibly effective tool for silencing dissent.
Absolutely. When people are afraid of the consequences of speaking up, they're much more likely to stay silent, even when they know something is wrong.
It creates a culture where everyone is walking on eggshells, constantly looking over their shoulder.
Afraid to say or do anything that might upset those in power.
And that silence only makes the authoritarian leader stronger.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It reinforces their sense of control, their belief that they can act with impunity because no one will dare to challenge them.
So it's not just about the leader themselves, it's about the environment they create, the culture of fear and obedience that allows them to thrive.
Right. It's like a toxic ecosystem.
And Babitsky argues that this pattern extends to institutions as well. Authoritarians don't like institutions that can hold them accountable or challenge their authority.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So things like the judiciary, the media, independent oversight bodies,
All potential threats to an authoritarian leader.
because they have the power to expose wrongdoing or limit their control.
So what do? Do they just shut these institutions down?
Sometimes they try, but it's not always that simple. It's often more effective to weaken them from within.
To undermine their credibility and effectiveness?
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Lots of ways. They might appoint loyalists to key positions, people who are more interested in pleasing the leader than upholding the institution's mission. They might cut funding, making it harder for the institution to function effectively.
So you create a slow decline, a gradual erosion of power.
Precisely. And then they often launch these public smear campaigns.
Accusing these institutions of being biased or corrupt or incompetent.
The goal is to sow distrust among the public, to make people question the legitimacy of these institutions.
It's a classic divide and conquer strategy.
Absolutely. You weaken your opponents by making them fight amongst themselves and by turning the public against them.
And it can be incredibly effective.
It really can. When people lose faith in the institutions that are supposed to protect their rights and hold power accountable.
It creates a vacuum.
And authoritarians are all too happy to fill that vacuum.
So it's not just about controlling people. It's about controlling the systems and structures that govern our lives.
The rules of the game.
Exactly. And speaking of control, one of the things that really struck me in Babitsky's essay was his point about corruption. He argues that both Trump and Putin view corruption as a fundamental part of governance.
Not as a problem to be solved, but as a tool to be wielded,
It's not just about personal enrichment either. It's about creating a system of dependencies.
where everyone owes something to someone else, with the leader at the top of the pyramid.
So it's like this web of favors, obligations, unspoken agreements.
It binds people to the leader and ensures their loyalty.
But it also erodes public trust.
Of course. When people see that the rules don't apply equally, that those in power are above the law,
It creates a sense of cynicism and apathy.
people become less likely to participate in the political process, less likely to hold their leaders accountable.
Which, of course, is exactly what authoritarians want.
They want people to feel disillusioned and powerless because it makes it easier to maintain control.
But Babitsky doesn't just focus on the dark side of things. He also offers some advice on how to resist these patterns.
Okay, I'm interested to hear this.
One of the most interesting points he makes is about the importance of recognizing how authoritarians exploit chaos. They seem to thrive on disorder, on a sense that things are spiraling out of control.
Like they deliberately create or amplify crises to justify their actions and consolidate their power.
Exactly. Think about how Putin used the threat of terrorism to justify his crackdown on dissent and his expansion of executive power,
Right. And we saw similar tactics employed by Trump,
constantly stoking fear and division.
whether it was through his rhetoric about immigrants, or his attacks on the media, or his attempts to undermine faith in democratic institutions.
And the goal is always the same, to make people feel scared, vulnerable, uncertain.
So that they'll be more willing to accept authoritarian solutions,
Yeah.
even if those solutions come at the expense of their freedoms.
It's like a twisted form of marketing. You create a problem, then you present yourself as the only one who can solve it.
But in this case, the product they're selling is control.
And the price is our freedom.
Exactly. And it's crucial to be aware of this tactic so that we can resist it.
We need to be able to recognize when someone is deliberately trying to sow chaos for their own gain.
And we need to be careful not to buy into the fear and division they're trying to create.
So being critical of the information we're consuming is key here.
Absolutely. We can't just take things at face value.
We need to be questioning motives, looking for evidence, considering alternative perspectives.
And we need to remember that we're stronger when we stand together.
Authoritarians thrive on division, on pitting us against each other.
It's like they're trying to turn us into a society of isolated individuals, each one suspicious of the other, too afraid to speak out or challenge those in power.
But if we can resist that urge to divide, if we can maintain our sense of community and shared purpose.
We'll be much better equipped to resist these kinds of power grabs.
You're right, solidarity is one of our most powerful weapons against authoritarianism.
And it's not just about resisting their attempts to divide us. It's also about actively promoting the values that they seek to undermine.
Values like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the rule of law, respect for human rights.
Exactly. These are the foundations of a healthy democracy.
And we need to be constantly vigilant in protecting them. So it's not enough to just recognize the patterns of authoritarianism.
We also need to actively promote the values and institutions that can counter those patterns.
It's about playing both offense and defense.
We need to be aware of the threats.
But we also need to be actively building a better, more resilient world.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of Babitsky's essay, the power of narrative.
He argues that both Trump and Putin are masters of controlling the narrative.
Even if it means resorting to lies and disinformation.
They understand that in the world of politics, perception is often more important than reality.
It's like they're creating their own alternative realities, carefully crafted narratives designed to manipulate and control public opinion.
And they're incredibly good at it.
They really are. They understand how to appeal to people's emotions, their fears, their prejudices.
Think about how Trump repeatedly dismissed any information that contradicted his worldview as fake news.
He effectively created his own reality bubble.
Where facts didn't matter, only his version of events did.
And it worked. Millions of people bought into his narratives.
Even when they were demonstrably false.
It's a reminder that we can't just passively consume information.
We need to be critical, discerning, skeptical.
Absolutely. And we need to support those who are working to uphold the truth, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular.
Journalists, fact-checkers, researchers, these are all vital allies in the fight against disinformation.
And it's not just about fighting back against lies. It's also about crafting our own narratives.
Stories that promote the values we believe in, stories that inspire hope and action.
That's a great point. We need to be proactive in shaping the narratives that shape our world.
We need to be telling stories that celebrate democracy, that highlight the importance of human rights, that promote tolerance and understanding.
Because in the end, it's a battle for hearts and minds.
And whoever can tell the most compelling story, whoever can capture people's imaginations and inspire them to act,
will ultimately prevail.
So let's be thoughtful consumers of information. Let's support those who are fighting for truth and justice. And let's tell stories that build bridges instead of walls.
Well said. This has been a lot to process. But I think it's incredibly valuable to understand these tactics, these patterns of behavior that define authoritarianism.
Because knowledge is power.
And by recognizing these warning signs, by understanding how these systems operate,
we can be better equipped to resist them and protect the democratic values we hold dear.
So before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to take a moment to connect this back to our own lives.
Okay, good idea. We've been talking about these patterns in the context of national politics.
But they can manifest in any setting where power dynamics exist.
That's a crucial point. These patterns aren't confined to the halls of government.
They can pop up anywhere. In our workplaces, our schools, our families, even our online communities.
Think about it. Have you ever felt pressured to conform to a group's opinion, even if you disagreed? Have you ever witnessed someone using their position of power to manipulate or control others?
Have you ever seen someone silenced or punished for speaking truth to power.
These are all examples of how the patterns of authoritarianism can manifest in everyday life.
And while they might seem small or insignificant on their own,
They can have a cumulative effect, slowly eroding our freedoms and normalizing these abusive behaviors.
so it's important to be aware of these patterns, to recognize them when they're happening and to resist them, even in seemingly small or insignificant ways.
Because every act of resistance, no matter how small, contributes to a culture of defiance.
A collective refusal to accept these kinds of power dynamics.
It's about saying no to manipulation, to control, to abuse of power.
And it's about standing up for those who are being silenced or marginalized.
It's about building a world where everyone feels safe to speak their truth, to challenge authority, and to demand justice.
And that's a world worth fighting for.
It is. It's a fight that requires constant vigilance, courage, and compassion.
But it's a fight we can win if we stand together and refuse to let these patterns of authoritarianism take root.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. And we've been covering a lot of ground here, unpacking Andrei Babitsky's warning about those patterns of authoritarianism, you know?
Yeah, and how we see those same patterns in leaders like Trump and Putin.
Exactly. And it's heavy stuff. To think about how they exploit vulnerabilities, manipulate systems, even thrive on chaos.
It can be pretty disheartening, honestly.
It can, but Babitsky doesn't just leave us hanging, He offers a framework for thinking about all of this. And it actually comes from a pretty unexpected place. Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager. That rings a bell. But refresh my memory.
Yeah, sure. So Blaise Pascal was the 17th century philosopher, and he argued that it's better to believe in God, because the potential consequences of not believing are way worse.
Oh, right. Like it's a risk-reward calculation applied to faith.
Exactly. And Babitsky applies that same logic to this threat of authoritarianism.
Interesting. So he's saying it's better to be overly cautious even if it's a false alarm.
Right, than to be caught off guard by the very real consequences of ignoring those warning signs.
So it's like taking out an insurance policy on your democracy. You might never need it, but if you do, you'll be really glad you have it.
Exactly. And the premium you pay is vigilance, staying informed, speaking up when you see something wrong, supporting those who are defending those democratic values.
So he's arguing for a kind of preemptive defense against authoritarianism.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And that defense starts with recognizing the patterns, the tactics that these types of leaders use.
And one of the key takeaways here is that these leaders are, in a way, predictable.
Yeah, they reveal their intentions, their values, their methods early on, but we often miss those signals.
Or we just don't want to see them.
We look away, tell ourselves it's not that bad or that someone else will deal with it.
But that's how these patterns take root.
Exactly. We become complicit when we ignore the warning signs. And that's why Babitsky's essay is so important. It's a call to action.
He's not just warning us. He's telling us to do something about it.
So what can we do? What does this preemptive defense look like?
Well, it starts with education. Understanding these patterns, recognizing them when they emerge.
Being able to spot them in the wild.
Exactly. And it means engaging in critical thinking, questioning the narratives that we're being fed, seeking out diverse perspectives.
And holding our leaders accountable, right? Demanding transparency, pushing back against those attempts to erode democratic norms and institutions.
Absolutely. And it also means supporting those who are already on the front lines. The journalists, the activists, the organizations that are working to protect human rights and promote civic engagement.
So this is about way more than just voting in elections, right? It's about actively engaging in our communities, being informed citizens, participating in the process.
You got it. It's not just about stopping one leader or one party. It's about defending those core values, freedom, equality, justice, the rule of law.
The foundations of a healthy democracy.
And those foundations require constant vigilance. They require us to actively participate.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. What are you willing to do to protect those values? To safeguard your own freedoms? To build a world where authoritarianism has no place?
Think about it. What small act of resistance, what conversation, what choice can you make today that will move you and the people around you in that direction?
Because even the smallest actions, when multiplied by millions, can create a powerful force for change. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.